The doctrine of fire. Let us begin our talk tonight. I hope that all the brothers will give their utmost attention. Well, brothers, in any case, it is necessary to keep knowing ourselves more and more if we truly want to achieve the inner self-realization of being. Obviously, we need to work, as I have already mentioned in my past lectures, with the element fire. Fire, in itself, is a substance that has eluded all chemical analysis. Scientists say that it is the product of combustion, which is absolutely false. No one knows what the nature of fire is. We know, for example, that the atmosphere contains oxygen and nitrogen. We are aware that water contains H2O, that is, hydrogen and oxygen. We also know that the earth contains carbon, but what is the true formula of the element fire? Any scientist would tell us about H2O, that 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen combine to form water. But let's experiment with H2O and try to combine the atoms of oxygen and hydrogen, as the formula dictates, in a laboratory, and see if water truly results. Obviously, it doesn't. Why? Because something is missing. What? The element fire. Therefore, the formula for H2O is incomplete. This is obvious. Thus, fire escapes all comprehension. A simple flame, like those we have in a candle, would be enough to set the world ablaze, and it would remain unscathed, neither increasing nor decreasing by a single atom. From any of these candles, we could light another and another and another, burn a gasoline tank, detonate a dynamite depot, and fire would continue, and we could burn the world, and the candle would remain the same, unmoved, as if nothing had happened. What kind of substance is this, which mocks chemists, performs such wonders, and yet remains unchanged, impassive? Truly, the substance of fire is divine. Now, as I mentioned to you in a previous talk, we are only interested in the hidden part of fire, the flame of the flame, the astral signature of fire, which is the divine, that which we see there on the cross, that INRI, ignis natura renovator integra, fire continuously renews nature. Therefore, the liberation of the human being is not possible outside of fire. Only by working with fire can we achieve final liberation. Worlds, for example, are nothing but granulations of Fahad. This is obvious. The doctrine we teach is the doctrine of fire. The books we have written were created with burning coals, and amidst the incessant crackling of the flames, we deliver the secret knowledge to humanity. We know well that behind fire, there are wonders. Once, a great elemental of fire was asked, "What is beyond fire?" It answered, "That is something we do not know." God is a consuming fire, says St. Paul, and so it is. In past talks, we mentioned that there are 2 ones, the unknowable Elohim and the knowable Elohim. Elohim is the unknowable and unmanifested divinity. As for Elohim, it is the army of the word, the army of the voice. It is like the solar star, like the spiritual sun, sacred absolute sun, emerging from the innermost depths of the unknowable. The army of the word emanates, then, from the sacred absolute sun, but the sacred absolute sun and the army of the word are one, having emerged from the living entrails of the unknowable. The army of the word is fire, it is the pluralized Fahad, but we must not forget that variety is unity. The army of the voice is composed of countless Tyan Kohans, creators of the universe, and all of them are flames of burning fire. But look how grand that display of Brahma is, that display of divinity, that display of the great universal fire, how from the unknowable emanates the demiurge, the architect of the universe, which is fire. Now, all of this army of the word, all of these Tyan Kohans, are obviously numerated, classified into groups, according to the universal cosmic ideas. They are living numbers, creating and recreating again. It is essential to understand that, from the bosom of the unknowable, the Logos, the demiurge, the spiritual stellar sun, the army of the word, truly emerged, and in turn, from this multiple Logos, like a flame composed of many flames, Atman, the ineffable, emanates. Atman is the innermost in each of us, our divine and nameless spirit. In turn, from Atman emanates Buddhi. And who is Buddhi? Buddhi is the superlative consciousness of being. Buddhi is Eros, it is Fahad as the messenger of the gods. In the superior worlds of cosmic consciousness, initiates can witness the concrete fact that Atman always sends Eros, or Fahad, or Buddhi, or the Valkyrie, as we would say in the classic language of Wagner, to carry out specific tasks. Thus, Fahad, or Buddhi, is Atman's messenger. One truly becomes ecstatic upon understanding the reality of Eros, one is amazed at seeing the Valkyries of the Mahatmas, working in the superior worlds of cosmic consciousness, delivering messages to all corners of the universe, ineffable ladies of indescribable beauty. The Valkyries work in the temples, the Valkyries deliver messages, the Valkyries assist the Mahatmas. They are the messenger Fahad, the extraordinary Eros that pulses in each of us. What would become of us without Eros? Could we possibly carry out the great work of the Father? We need Eros to be able to disintegrate the inhuman psychic aggregates we carry within us. Thus, the star that has emanated from the sacred Absolute Sun is the Demiurge, the creator of the universe, it is the flame from which the seven holy flames emerge. This flame is triple, but from it emerge the seven flames, that is, from the triple flame comes the eternal heptaparaparshinok, from three comes seven. In the same way that we, with 3 candles lit there on the altar, can light 7, likewise, 3 forming a flame with 3 wicks is the Logos as holy affirmation, the Logos as holy denial, the Logos as holy reconciliation. But from that triple flame emerges the eternal heptaparaparshinok, the 7 flames. Atman, Buddhi, and Atman Buddhi form the divine interior monad in each of us. Then comes the higher manas or human soul, the part of us that is human, afterward comes that mind we use to think, which unfortunately is trapped within the multiple psychic aggregates that constitute the myself, the self, the I, which is why we say that we do not have one mind, but many minds. It is obvious that if the mental substance is bottled within different jars, if it is divided among them, if the substance of the mind is enclosed within many selves, then there is no longer a single mind, but many minds, unfortunately. But what is hidden behind all these minds, the radical, is fire, which would actually be the 4th fire, because the 5th is behind all those emotions we carry, and in the authentic initiate, it is in their astral body. The 6th flame is behind the principle of life, it is prana, it is fire as prana or life, and the 7th burns in the very spinal cord of the Gnostic ascetic. In truth, speaking from the perspective of occult anatomy, we would say that there are 7 serpents, 2 groups of 3, with the sublime crowning of the 7th tongue of fire that connects us to the One, to the Law, to the Father. If Atman truly receives the igneous principle of fire, from the unknowable, through the mediation of the Creator Demiurge of the universe, there is no doubt that everything comes to be contained within Buddhi. Rightly so, we have been told that Buddhi is like a fine and transparent alabaster vessel, through which the flame of prajna burns. In Buddhi, in Eros, in the Valkyrie, the maiden, the beautiful Helen of Troy, Atman, the ineffable, is contained, but ultimately, Atman Buddhi as a monad, are radicals. In a previous lecture, I mentioned that we must work with the 7 radicals, and I believe the brothers are already informed about this, which are the 7 aspects of fire within us, the 7 tongues of fire in occult anatomy, which emanate directly from the divine architect of the universe. This is obvious and should be understood as such. The Siddha, in itself unknowable, is fundamental, from it emanates fire. Sat is Sati and from the Sati emanates fire, that is, the architect demiurge. But there is a point I want to emphasize tonight, although it is true that the holy affirming, the holy denying, and the holy reconciling, that is, the inner logoi of each of us, is radical, it is the intimate Buddha of each of us, because each carries their intimate Buddha, even if they have not incarnated it, that intimate Buddha, in turn, emanates from Adi Buddha, and Adi Buddha is the unknowable. Individualizing, we would say that each of us has their Adi Buddha in the unknowable absolute abstract space. From it emanates our logoi, and I am already particularizing and concretizing, and from the logoi, in turn, emanate the 7 aspects of Fahad, of fire. When I say that we must work with fire, it should be well understood. We must have a little more consciousness, greater, about what fire is, we must understand it better. The mother Kundalini, of which we have spoken so much, is fire, it is the Fahad within us, in our occult anatomy, it is a variant of our own being, but derived. Yes, we need to work with fire, with her, because she is the carrier of the fire. She, the igneous serpent, writhes terrifyingly between the candlesticks of the temple. That sacred cobra of the great mysteries is fire crackling within the aura of the universe, only she can reduce to ashes the inhuman psychic aggregates we carry within. It is not an easy thing to disintegrate the totality of psychic aggregates. Consider that these aggregates are processed in 7 levels of being. There are saints who have managed to disintegrate aggregates in 5 or 6 levels, very rarely does someone manage to disintegrate the psychic aggregates in the 7 levels of being. It turns out that in the last levels, especially in the 7th, such aggregates become terribly subtle and are often frightfully difficult. If the initiate is not sufficiently comprehensive, they may fail in the great work. In the higher levels of being, there are things that surprise. The highest morals do not serve for the 7th level of work, nor even for the 6th, codes of ethics become unnecessary, the concepts one had, based on merely superficial interpretations of the sacred scriptures, are destroyed, etc. Thus, the initiate must become independent not only from the forces of evil but also from the forces of good, they must fight against the powers of evil and the powers of good. Ultimately, good becomes evil, and many aspects that seemed evil turn into good. One must go beyond good and evil and know the good of the bad and the bad of the good. The dogmatic structures of conventional ethics, in the end, would only serve as an obstacle for those walking the path of self-realization, that is the harsh reality of the facts. People tend to interpret everything in their own superficial way, and anyone wishing to work at a 7th level must be strictly understanding. They must go beyond all dogma and take inventory of themselves, to know what they have in excess and what they lack. Many times, a beautiful virtue can become an obstacle for the navigator, sometimes, even precious gems of spirituality become a hindrance. That is why it is so difficult to disintegrate psychic aggregates in the 7 levels of being, for that reason. On the other hand, one must learn to manage the 5 cylinders of the organic machine because the aggregates we have are related to the 5 cylinders of the organic machine. What are those 5 cylinders? Intellectual center, where is it? We already know it's in the brain. Emotional center, where is it? In the heart, solar plexus, and centers of the great sympathetic nervous system. Motor center, where is it? Upper part of the spinal cord. Instinctive center, where is it? In the lower part of the spinal cord. And the sexual center? In the sex. There are psychic aggregates in the intellectual center, as there are in the emotional, as there are in the motor, as there are in the instinctive, as there are in the sexual. This is obvious. One must study the psychic aggregates in each center to see how they behave. It is a matter of self-reflection and direct experience, psychological observation, etc. In any case, no aggregate can be disintegrated without the help of the Divine Mother Kundalini, the cobra of the great mysteries, and she demands, for the disintegration of any psychic aggregates, prior understanding of the psychological defect we want to reduce to ashes. This is obvious. First, we must discover the defect and then work on it. We need the evident self-reflection of the being to reach a deep understanding. We need intimate meditation if we really want to understand such or such a defect. But once understood, we must work on it with the divine sacred cobra of the great mysteries. Only in this way can we eliminate it. And I repeat, every defect is related to some center of the organic machine, but with the help of fire, that which comes from the demiurge, creator of the universe, to manifestation through all these levels of being, we can reduce any undesirable psychic element to ashes. So you need to familiarize yourselves a little more with the fire, learn to feel with the fire, learn to think with the fire, to worship the fire, as the Parsis do, just as Christians exclaim, God is a devouring fire. Like the Parsis, who worship fire, like the members of any Mayan, Toltec, Zapotec, or Incan tribe, who pay so much homage to the fire, they ultimately belong to the purest paganism and the most delightful Christic esotericism. Only with fire can we disintegrate the psychic aggregates. My dear brothers, of the centers we have in our organism, there is no doubt that the most difficult to control is the emotional center. Because the intellectual center, although challenging, with certain disciplines, we more or less manage to control it. The motor center, which produces movements, and is located in the upper part of the spinal column, is also controllable. One can control the movements of their body, walk if they want to walk, lift an arm if they want to lift it, or not lift it if they don't want to, wrinkle the brow or not wrinkle it. Thus, all the activities of the motor center are under the will, but the emotional center is terrible, that issue of negative emotions, of feelings and sentimentality, etc., becomes difficult to control. In India, for example, they compare the emotional center to an elephant. A mad elephant, for instance, what do they do in India to control it? They place two healthy, sane elephants on either side, they tie them so they don't leave, and then those two, sane, eventually teach the mad one to be sane, and in the end, the mad elephant becomes sane. It's a system used in India, and it's a good one. The emotional center is an elephant, the intellectual center is another elephant, and the motor center is another elephant, the motor instinctive sexual center. These two elephants, the intellectual and the motor, can control the mad elephant of emotions. If at any moment we want to explode with despair or anguish, that is, if we have identified with a negative emotion, we're in trouble. What should we do? Lie down on the bed, relax, and clear the mind. By relaxing, we are acting with the motor center. Since we relax the whole body, loosen all the muscles, and release all tension in the organism. And by clearing the mind, that is, by bringing the mind to stillness and silence, what happens? The emotional center has no choice but to calm down a bit, to become serene, and in the end, the intellectual and motor centers come to dominate the emotional. They are the two sane elephants that tame the mad elephant. It is also possible to control lower emotions with higher emotions. There are many types of lower emotions, you all know this well. A family member dies, we scream, we cry, we despair. Why? Because we do not want to cooperate with the inevitable, and that is the worst of the worst. One must learn to cooperate with the inevitable in life. We do not accept it because a loved one has died, and we scream in anguish and refuse to accept it. We see the body in the coffin, there, and yet it does not seem dead to us, and we do not believe it. It's impossible for us to believe that this person has died. We give ourselves over to anguish and desolation. It's terrible. How could we control that state? In two ways. 1, we could appeal to the pair of elephants, the motor and intellectual centers, relax the body, and quiet the mind. That would be one system. Another way, we could appeal to a different emotion, a higher emotion. Perhaps in such moments, listening to a Beethoven symphony or Mozart's The Magic Flute might do us much good, or we could immerse ourselves with emotion in deep meditation, reflecting on the mysteries of life and death. Then, through a higher emotion, we control the lower emotions and overcome the pain caused by the death of a loved one. That is clear. The emotional center is very interesting, but we must take control of the lower emotions, control them, subdue them, and this is possible according to our teaching. Lower emotions cause much harm. Lower emotions like those evoked by bullfighting, lower emotions like those evoked by movies, lower emotions like those in the wild parties, lower emotions like those experienced by the one who wins the lottery, or who is excited by a news report, or a war, or any number of things in the world, lower emotions like those stirred by tequila, lower emotions like those people develop in their bestialities, which only serve to strengthen the inhuman psychic aggregates we carry inside and to create new ones as well. It is necessary to eliminate lower emotions through higher emotions. This is possible, to learn to live an uplifting and fundamentally dignified life, that is essential. Otherwise, no progress would be possible. How, in what way? Above all, we need to be more sincere with ourselves in order to develop the higher emotional center and free ourselves from purely negative and superficial emotions. There are people who are polite to others, who are decent. There are people who offer friendship to others, but that is the public or exoteric aspect, so to speak, but that is not everything. Knowing that we have an inner psychology, it is not enough just to behave decently with others, or to offer the fragrance of friendship from an external point of view. What is the behavior we have internally toward others? Normally, those who offer friendship to someone have two faces, the outward and the inward. Outwardly, it may appear magnificent, but inwardly, who knows? Are we sure we are not criticizing the friend to whom we have given so much esteem? Are we sure we do not feel some antipathy toward some of their traits? Are we sure we are not dragging them into the cave of our mind to torture them, to mock them, while we smile sweetly at them? How many people who claim to esteem someone still criticize that person internally? Even if they do not voice their criticisms, they mock their closest friends, even if they smile sweetly in their presence. We really need to be more complete, more integral. Let's try for a moment to synchronize two watches, the outer and the inner, the external and the psychological, to make them run in perfect harmony with each other, because it is useless for us to behave well with our friends, to offer them our affection, if internally we are mocking them, criticizing them, or torturing them. It is better for both watches, the external and the internal, to tick in unison, second by second, moment by moment. We must be more complete, more integral, and stop the bitter, psychological, internal, criticism of people we claim to care for. How is it possible for us to care for someone and yet, internally, criticize them? How can we speak well of someone we care about but, inside, devour them alive? Now, you must know very well that within each of us lie many people, all the different eyes. When one takes one of these eyes and studies it with the sense of psychological self-observation, one can see that it has its centers, the intellectual center, the emotional center, and the motor instinctive sexual center, meaning it possesses the three brains. Any eye has a mind in bondage, has will in bondage, and is a complete person. Thus, within us exist many people, within each person live many people, the psychic aggregates. So, any friendship we have deserves to be properly, we might say, treated. You have a friend, for example, and there are things you like about them and things you dislike. You are friends with one of your friend's eyes, or a few of their eyes, but there are other eyes of your friend that annoy you, that cause you antipathy, because we must keep in mind that many people manifest within each person. You are usually friends with certain aggregates of this or that friend, of this or that person, but you are not friends with all the aggregates of that friend in question. That is why people say, there are things about this friend that I like, and things I dislike, they have good qualities and bad qualities. That's the way we talk. It all depends on which aggregate is speaking at a given moment. So, the friendship we feel for others is not complete. We only feel friendship for a few aggregates of that person, but we do not feel affection for the other aggregates of that other person. It may be that the physical psychological person we esteem has psychological aggregates that we do not value, and at certain times, that person becomes heavy for us precisely because other aggregates are expressing themselves with which we are not familiar. This is the harsh reality of the facts. If we had a permanent self, we would say, I am a friend of so and so, completely and totally, we would not find any buts or criticisms of any kind. But it turns out that there is no permanent self, but many. So, which aggregate or self of subject XX do we value? It will not be all of them. This is why we need to be comprehensive in this matter of interrelation. Why do friends fight? Simply because suddenly an aggregate that is not a friend of the friend intervenes within the personality, and then discord arises. But if later that aggregate withdraws and another one that is indeed a friend of the friend intervenes, they make peace. How fatuous friendships are then! They are not complete, and they are not complete because they are not understanding, they do not grasp the plurality of the self, otherwise, they would be complete, knowing how to forgive their friends' defects and not quarrel with them. That knowledge is lacking for us not to quarrel with our friends, we must become more aware of that. This way, we improve our interrelation and coexistence. There are likes that we could say are mechanical and dislikes that are mechanical. Neither serve us because they are mechanical. Sometimes we say, so and so rubs me the wrong way, but what is it that we dislike about so and so? A psychic aggregate that is possibly not a friend to us, that is all. We should not try to force a liking with someone we dislike, rather, we should first discover the cause of the dislike. When we realize through reflection that this dislike is mechanical, then the dislike disappears by itself, and liking remains. But how could we, or what basis could serve us to reach the conclusion that a dislike is mechanical? I say that it is simply understanding the plurality of the self. It is undeniable that within every person, many people live. There are times when in certain people, for example, in a specific subject, some aggregates express themselves that we do not like, and this is mechanical. Let us reflect that within that person who we dislike, there are also aggregates that can sympathize with us and be helpful and friendly. Not all the aggregates that manifest in a subject XX are unpleasant for us, there can be aggregates that we like manifesting in a XX so and so we dislike. If we reflect on that, if we understand this point of view of the plurality of the self, the mechanical dislike that is so harmful will disappear because it develops more and more the inhuman psychic elements related to the negative emotional center. The more we eliminate the aggregates of the negative emotional center, the more the superior emotional center will develop in us. However, I say that the superior emotional center is grandiose, it is more powerful than the intellect. With the superior emotional center, we can understand the nature of fire. The sacred books are written with burning coals, that is, with fire. The language of the Bible, for example, is parabolic, it is the language of the superior emotional center. Mystical and incorporeal experiences are obviously parabolic and can only be understood with the superior emotional center. The mysteries of life and death are perfectly knowable through the superior emotional center, that is obvious. I have told you that the monad in us is the most important thing, that the more we eliminate the lower psychic elements, the more we will receive the radiations of the monad. This monad is Atman Buddhi. Atman is the ineffable, it receives the strength that comes from the creator demiurge, the demiurge, in turn, receives it from Adi Buddha, the unknowable essence. Atman, as a manifestation of the divine architect of the universe, is ineffable, it is what would be called Paramatman or Shiva Tattva. Buddhi, despite being so spiritual, is more corporeal, we could say, more concrete than Atman. Buddhi Eros, as a fiery principle, is obviously becoming more and more evident to us. Its radiations reach us deeper and deeper as we dissolve the negative emotions of the emotional center and as the superior emotional center develops. Atman Buddhi is the monad, it is the reality within us, what matters, the real being in us. We must fight, eliminating negative emotions to approach the monad more and more, and the monad helps us precisely because from Buddhi emanates Eros, that extraordinary sexual force with which we can disintegrate the psychic aggregates in the forge of the syllabes. What would become of us without Eros? Eros is opposed by Anteros, the powers of evil, which are not outside of us, but inside us, here and now, they are all those aggregates of the lower emotional center, the Anteros. If we eliminate negative emotions and develop the superior emotional center, we will penetrate deeper and deeper into the essence of fire. We will be getting closer and closer to our inner monad that has always smiled at us. Do not forget that the emotional center, in its essence, is pure, radiant. The lower emotions, located in the lower parts or points of the emotional center, constitute the lower emotional, but if we eliminate the lower emotions, then everything remains perfect like a delicious lotus flower, the superior emotional center. In any case, Atman is the ray that unites us to the Logos and to Adi Buddha. And the force of Adi Buddha and the interior Logoi reaches Atman and is contained in Buddhai, but the approach to Buddhai is impossible while we have negative emotions. In other words, the approach to the monad becomes difficult if we continue with the lower emotions. We must not accept lower emotions within us, we must cultivate the higher emotions, we must listen to Beethoven, we must listen to Mozart, to Liszt, to Tchaikovsky, we must learn to paint, but the paintings we create should not be subhuman, we must pour our noblest feelings into them. Everything we do should be dignifying and essentially uplifting. One is filled with ecstasy when contemplating the Corinthian columns of ancient times or the marbles of Rome and Athens, the magnificent sculptures of a black Isis in the land of the Pharaohs, or of Apollo, or of the Venus of Milo, or of the chaste Diana. One is filled with ecstasy and vibrates with superior emotion when listening, for example, to the lyre of ancient times, or surrendering to deep meditation in the bosom of nature, or strolling through the ruins of ancient Rome, or walking along the banks of the Ganges, or kneeling before the Guru among the perpetual snows of the Himalayas. Then the superior emotion vibrates. In ancient times, back in Lemuria, during the times when the rivers of pure water of life flowed with milk and honey, when the lyre of Orpheus had not yet fallen upon the pavement of the temple, shattered, the superior emotional center vibrated intensely in every human being. That was the era of the Titans, the time when the humans populating the face of the earth could see the aura of worlds and perceive more than half of a whole topamnas in color tonalities. We well know that a whole topamnas has more than 5 million tonalities. But when the lower emotional center developed with violent passions, lust, hatred, and cruel wars among brothers, then that sense became atrophied, humanity became trapped in this three-dimensional world of Euclid. The time has come to understand that only through the superior emotional center can we penetrate more deeply within ourselves. If we proceed rightly, if we learn to live, if we learn to relate to our peers in a beautiful way, then we will approach the sacred monad more and more, and different flashes of cosmic consciousness will surprise us, becoming more and more continuous, until one day we all, in reality, will have the awakened consciousness, the superlative consciousness of being, Buddhai. That day we will be blessed, in that delightful morning, the vibrations of Buddhai will completely saturate us, and we will truly know how to live in the perfect conscious state. So far, this lecture is concluded. Now I give full freedom for those present to ask questions about the topic, but without straying from it. Student: Master, why do you speak against virtues? Master: you see how easy it is to distort the teaching. You do it with a simple and sincere heart, but after you say that, another person distorts it a little more, and the third continues distorting it, and when the teaching reaches all of America, it will be said, Samael Aun Weor is against virtues, no more virtues. This is how the teaching is distorted, and this is how the teachings of all the elder brothers who have helped humanity have been distorted. What remains of Buddhism, can you tell me? Gautama Sakyamuni spoke against the abominable Kundartigwador organ, his entire doctrine was against the bad consequences of that abominable organ. Today we have a completely deformed Buddhist gospel, almost nothing remains of ancient Buddhism, everything has been distorted. I am not pronouncing myself against virtues, I clarify, we must think correctly. Water is useful, magnificent, good in the sink, good in its container, in the bathroom, but what would you say about water flooding the living room, inundating the bedrooms? Everything would change, right? It would be bad. Fire is good in the kitchen, it is also magnificent there, in candles, But if the fire were burning this house right now and the firefighters arrived, what would we say? It would be a calamity, right? So, every virtue is good in its place, but out of its place, it is bad. A missionary, like you, is fine to teach, to spread the teachings everywhere, but what if instead of spreading the teachings among different people, on the streets or in the lumicials, or in family homes, you went to brothels to spread them? Would that be correct? It would be bad, right? Then the missionary would become what? A wicked person, right? Very well, but that does not mean that the missionary is wicked. It all depends on the use he makes of his virtues. Money in itself is neither good nor bad, it all depends on how it is used. If it is used for good, it is good; if it is used for evil, it is bad. The same goes for virtues. They are precious, they are ineffable gems. It is clear that every eliminated psychological defect leaves room for the crystallization of a virtue. But virtues, out of their place, are bad. They can also do a lot of harm, not only to others, but one can harm oneself with one's own virtues if they do not know how to handle them. I want the brothers to understand this with perfect clarity. What would you say about violence? Is violence good or not? What do you respond? What would be the answer? Student, that it is bad. Student, that it is both good and bad. Master, the latter response is more logical. Student, violence, if applied with a sense of defense, is good for one. But if applied instinctively, then it harms us. Master, essentially, what you are saying is correct. But it needs to be detailed. Obviously, violence leads to violence, and it is not advisable, but let's consider this: a man has his wife and his children, he also has daughters, already grown, young ladies, when suddenly a group of bandits decides to assault the house to violate his wife, violate his daughters, and everything, burn the house and rob. But there is a man, the husband. He senses when the bandits enter the house, he is aware of that, but instead of wielding a weapon to defend his home, he blesses the bandits, because he is on the path, he is on the way. May God bless you, brothers of my soul. Do not commit the horrible crime of violating my wife, while she is being violated, of violating my daughters, while they are being violated, of robbing my money, while they are catching the last coins, of burning my house, when they are already setting it on fire. Do not do that, little brothers, because you will have much karma to pay. However, I am willing to bless all of you. Well, let's suppose he comes out alive from that confrontation because the bandits feel compassion for him. Well, how would that man appear before the authorities and before the divinity? The authorities? I believe they would judge him as an accomplice to the crime. This is already seen in the penal code. That man deserves prison, right? For being a coward, and because he has become an accomplice to the crime, it is obvious that he deserves prison. He has become an accomplice, he is a coward. So, what is that man's duty there? He is on the path, he is initiated, he wants to be a Mahatma, and I don't know what else. What is his duty? To die on the battlefield defending his family by any means necessary, to die fighting, but to die, if he has to die, die fulfilling his duty as a man, that is his duty. Or, what would we say, for example, about a soldier, and here we have our brother, Lieutenant Colonel MRT, what would we say, for example, or what would our brother who is a soldier say? That suddenly the homeland is threatened, the gringos come to invade us, to plunder, to violate, to burn, to rob, and the army says, no, we will not fight anymore. God bless all these invaders. If they burn, that will be their karma. May God bless them, we will not fight. They cross their arms to give blessings and pray for the little bandits who are attacking. What would be said about such an army? Student. Teacher. How? Student. Immediately, that's a betrayal to the homeland. Teacher. High treason. That's obvious. High treason. Condemnable, not only by the judges of the earth but also by divinity. What is, then, the duty of the army at that moment? Student. To attack, to defend. Teacher. To defend, we must use weapons. Thus, weapons in themselves are neither good nor bad, it all depends on how they are used. If used for good, they are good, but if used for evil, they are bad, it all depends. So, this about virtues is something to reflect on a lot, a great deal, because with virtues, one can not only harm others but also harm oneself. Let's see, will the brother ask something? Student. I didn't understand in the Ramayana, why does Krishna incite Arjuna to fight against his relatives? I haven't been able to interpret that. I don't understand that. Teacher. Well, long live Krishna with his encouragements to Arjuna. And long live that fight against relatives, that's wonderful. I myself agree, let's fight against all the relatives. Let's draw our swords and go against everyone. Do you know who those relatives are? They are all the psychic aggregates we carry within ourselves, we must fight against them, and very hard, even if it hurts us, they are our relatives, but we must give them Shisharan, which implies dealing with them decisively, and there's no other way. Let's hear, speak up. Student. Teacher, excuse me, a question, what interpretation can we give? Teacher. How? Student. What interpretation can we give to the evangelical teaching that if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other? Teacher. Yes. I assure you that if someone comes to me and strikes me, I'll put the other one so they can strike me harder. No problem. But if I have a group of children here with me, or if I am here as a guardian of the temple, I am occupying, for example, the brother's position, and at that moment a group of bandits come to give you Shisharan, I would then play my part, that's what the sword is for, and if they hit me or come at me, well, I die on the battlefield. What is the duty of a temple guardian? Tell me, what's the answer? Student. To defend, even with one's life, the people who are being guarded. Teacher. Correct. You are currently the guardian of the temple, if at this moment someone comes to attack us, if mobs come, if banditry comes to attack these brothers, you must lose your life there if necessary. Because that is the guardian of the temple. So, one thing is one thing and another thing is another thing. One thing is that we bless our enemies, that we return good for evil, that we turn the right cheek so they can strike us harder, and another thing is to fulfill our duty when the time comes to defend, to know how to defend those in our charge. Understood. Is there another question? Yes, brother. Student. Venerable, speaking of virtues, can it be considered that in many cases, a virtue can create psychological dependence? Teacher. A virtue, when not used correctly, can create psychological dependencies, it can make one a tyrant, it can cause one to take a false step, etc. For example, how many judges who had the virtue of fulfilling their duty during the French Revolution sent innocents to the guillotine? There were executioners whose duty was to decapitate many at the guillotine, and they fulfilled that duty they had, with the virtue of duty, and they decapitated them, made the blade fall on their necks, is that correct? So, what then? We must learn to manage virtues, it's not that they are to be underestimated, they are precious gems that arise in us as the psychic aggregates are eliminated. But everything in its place. We already said that fire is good in the kitchen, but not in the living room, and that water is fine in the sink, but it's not good to invade the bedrooms. A virtue is good in its place, it's bad when it's out of place. That's all. We must be more balanced, more reflective, more mature, that's obvious. For example, mechanical antipathy is absurd. But it's of no use to fight against mechanical antipathy, it's of no use, for example, to say, I can't stand this person. But since I'm in Gnosis, I'll see how I can befriend this person, and force myself to smile at them artificially, and it turns out that that smile, more than a smile, becomes a tragic grimace. No. What we must do is dissect that mechanical antipathy to see why we can't stand that person. This requires a lot of self-reflection, a lot of psychological self-observation, a lot of meditation, and in the end, we discover the cause. Once we have discovered that cause, we disintegrate it with the help of the Divine Mother Kundalini, with the help of the sacred fire. Then, the virtue of sympathy toward that person emerges in us. A virtue, sympathy toward that person who used to irritate us. We must become aware of everything, live a conscious life, a more mature life, less mechanical. Let's see, brother. Student. Teacher, can virtue be learned? Teacher. Learn. Well, never. Those are precious gems or flowers of the soul that arise in us when we have eliminated certain psychological defects. Let's say, for example, when we eliminate anger, sweetness arises in us. When we eliminate lust, in its place arises the virtue of chastity. When we eliminate hatred, the virtue of love emerges in its place. And as we eliminate these psychological defects, the virtues arise in their place. That's why we say that we need to crystallize soul within us, and the soul is pure universal fire. That divine fire, that ineffable fire must gradually crystallize within us. But we couldn't crystallize the soul in us if we don't eliminate psychological defects. As we eliminate each psychic aggregate, in its place a virtue, a power, a law, etc., will begin to crystallize. This is called crystallizing the soul. And finally, when all psychic aggregates are eliminated, only the soul will remain in us, even the body will become soul. What is the body of a mutant? It is a body already transformed into soul. But to crystallize the soul in us, which is pure living fire, it is absolutely necessary to eliminate the psychic aggregates. And this is only possible by going through great emotional crisis. This is not merely an intellectual matter. No. To eliminate a psychic aggregate, one must go through terrible regrets, cry, despair, hit the ground, and even whip oneself if necessary. One must suffer a lot, repent and go through terrible, I repeat, bitterness. If one does not go through those emotional crises, then one does not disintegrate what must be disintegrated and does not crystallize the virtues, nor does one crystallize the soul. But when one manages to crystallize the soul and everything becomes soul, then it shines gloriously, it is another flame of the great bonfire, burning amidst the magnificent aura of the universe. Thus teaches the doctrine of fire, and this is how we must understand it. Any other questions? Student. Teacher, Eros is fire within us, and the Divine Mother is also fire within us. How do we ensure that Eros, when taken to the maximum, does not escape us like water? Teacher. What? Student. That it doesn't escape us. Teacher. Eros is fire, the sexual fire that emanates from the monad. The monad, in turn, receives it from the logos. This erotic fire arises specifically from the Valkyrie, from the Buddhi, in manifestation. It does not escape when the hermetic vessel is not spilled, when the vessel containing the oil remains intact. But if the vessel of Hermes spills, that erotic fire escapes, it gets lost, and then, what will we work with? We need the power of the monad if we want to eliminate the psychic aggregates. This must be understood, this must be comprehended. Is there anything else to ask? Teacher. How far should that fire be stirred? Teacher. It should be what? Student. How far should we work with that fire? Should it be in a rather rhythmic way, or can it go up to in fire? Teacher. The fire must manifest, or must be used, to be clearer, throughout the esoteric work perfectly and rhythmically. Because there are times of increase and times of decrease, there are times of particular Mahamanvantaras and times of particular Mahapralayas, times of activity and times of rest. Each period of activity must be followed by a creative magnetic pause, because in everything, there is biorhythm. Let's see, brother. Student. Teacher, going back to the emotional crises you mentioned, would it be congruent for a person genuinely interested in doing the great work to ask the being to make them go through these emotional crises? Teacher. The being is the being and has many parts. Which part of the being are you referring to? Student. At least to the psychological trainer, to the particular Anubis. Teacher. Each part of the being deserves reflection because we know very well that from the unique flame, the 7 flames emanate, and the 7 multiply by 7, and so on, continuing with another 7, etc., etc., etc. Thus, one only does a part, the other parts of the being must work too, that is obvious, each flame is obliged to work. But, obviously, it is the Divine Mother Kundalini, the wife of Shiva, who is truly obliged to perform the maximum work, and regarding the emotional crisis, it is a matter of the higher emotional center, a matter of understanding. When one understands how absurd one has been, when one realizes that one is nothing more than a human wreck that is worth nothing, then the repentance for all the crimes committed arises, and from this, the natural emotional crisis arises, not faked, but truly felt, that's all. Student. Teacher, when it is said that water is the habitat of fire, does it mean that fire comes from water, or is fire the first element that gives life to the other elements? Teacher. You can analyze water. Find the formula H2O. But that H2O without Fahad would be incomplete, the Fahad must be added to the formula. Thus, there could not be water without the element fire, which is primary, it is fundamental. When fire condenses, it first does so into air, then into water, and finally into earth. You can know the chemical elements of water, H2O, you can know the chemical elements of earth and understand how important carbon is, you can know the chemical elements of air and understand what nitrogen and oxygen are, but what are the chemical elements of fire? Who has analyzed that substance, what is its formula? It is very unknown, why? Because it is the living expression of being, the reflection of the logos in the universe. Thus, everything comes from fire. And if we do not work with fire disintegrating our psychological defects, we will walk the path of error. Student. Teacher, then, it is said that Lucifer is. What is the relationship between Lucifer and the Divine Mother in us, and in the work in the forge? Teacher. Lu. Student. Teacher. Lucifer is fire, is Fahad, is the sulfur of the medieval alchemists. Obviously, it is the reflection of the cosmic Christus, or of Vishnu, in us and within us. Obviously, it descends to the depths of our being. In terms of Christic esotericism, we say that he is the devil when we have not yet eliminated the aggregates because in him then reflect all our defects. But if we disintegrate our psychic aggregates, he shines and integrates, and he will integrate with us to transform us and turn us into mutants. What is a mutant? It is a man integrated with Lucifer, that is a mutant. Lucifer gives us all powers, he gives us the elixir of long life, he gives us the power over the elements of fire, air, water, and earth. But for Lucifer to shine in us and integrate with us, he first needs to be whitened. That's why medieval alchemists say, burn your books and whiten the brass. The brass must be whitened, we need to whiten the devil. Each of you has the devil, black as coal, horrible, you need to whiten him, and only you, each of you, can whiten him by disintegrating your psychic aggregates. The day you do it, you will integrate with him, and he with you, and he will deliver to you the hidden treasure, the golden fleece, and will give you all the powers. Before that, it is not possible, understood? Is there any other question? Student. Teacher, well, speak more clearly because I'm not understanding, slow it down for me, clearer, slower, and louder. Student, when regret doesn't arise, teacher, any determination we make, due to the multiplicity of the ego, to, let's say, punish ourselves as Saint Anthony or Saint Francis did, then that could apparently be an evil that might help us on the path of self-realization, to eliminate a certain psychic aggregate. Teacher, well, there are no dogmas here, what we have are inventories, sums and subtractions, multiplications and divisions. We need to know what we have too much of and what we lack, without dogmas. First of all, what is needed is to know if regret doesn't arise in us. If it truly doesn't arise, it's because we are perverse. Because when it arises in us, it's because there is still no perversity. But if it doesn't arise, we are too wicked, too perverse. Obviously, my dear friends, what is in regret? Some translate it one way and others another. There are those who say it's changing one's way of thinking and cite Greek terms and so on, etc., etc., and many other things. Forgive my frankness, but I don't agree with those conceptions. When one truly faces their own divine monad, which emanates from the sacred absolute Son, and looks into what they have at their core and realizes all their barbarities, there is regret, they work with regret, go through emotional crises. But when one has strayed so far from the sacred absolute Son that the emanations, the cosmic waves of the sacred absolute Son no longer reach them, because they are too deviated, fallen into black magic, it's a lost case. In that case, they are wicked. And that wicked person will have to punish themselves a lot, they will need to go through horrible penances, obviously, they will need to be very sincere with themselves, too sincere, so that they can, in truth, disintegrate the inhuman psychic aggregates they carry within. But, above all, if regret hasn't reached them, it's because they are wicked, a perverse person. They have reached perversity. Because one thing is wickedness and another is perversity, the perverse person no longer has remorse or regret. They are a lost cause, the cosmic waves of the sacred absolute Son no longer touch them. That's why they feel neither remorse nor regret, they become cynical and inhabit the submerged mineral kingdom, entering the world of 96 laws. That's all. But how to deal with that case, to make someone who has no regret feel regret, I repeat, they will need to appeal to a lot of reflective force to analyze their psychological defects and even do some rigorous penances and discipline themselves, etc. Well, I have spoken. Any other words, any other questions? Student. The question of Lucifer, I wanted to know, or I've had this concern. I remember that according to what you tell us, we have 3% of free consciousness at this moment. That could mean that there is a part of our Lucifer that is not black. So, if we see, let's say, Faust, he calls his Lucifer, his divine daimon. Is the same formula for working with him, or for invoking him here? Teacher, well, behind that question lies a spring of curiosity. Deep down, at the core, there is a spring of curiosity. You would like to work with him simply because so much has been said about him. Goethe speaks, Dr. Faust, enchanter and magician, he is cited in so many texts that it's worth trying to form some friendship with him. But I ask those present here, is there anyone who is already prepared like